call neuroception, this unconscious ability to assess a circumstance or another being or a person. You can use that. You can rely on that. Maybe if you're not practiced, you'll find that you can upgrade the skill. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of a template, okay, in which to put your sense of neuroception about a person. Brain gym, coordination, flexibility, endurance, and strength. There are signals in there that actually work for those purposes. I won't bother with the science right now, but it's not haphazard. It's not haphazard. You know, if you're an exercise trainer, I'm so bored, I always give the same example. You want to play tennis, right? You come to, I'm a tennis coach. And I say, well, that's great. However, it would be foolish, a waste of your time and money, to take you on the tennis court right away. Because your agility, your coordination is not been refined, right? You haven't done like the famous hand-eye coordination is not at a good level. So if you try to even hit the ball for the serve, you're going to, I hate tennis because you can't even hit the ball. Let's work on some agility coordination training first, right? Let's start like just juggle these two balls, just toss them up and down, or one ball up and down. This is, somebody comes for an Neurolite session, toss them a tennis ball and say, throw it up 3 times right hand, 3 times left hand. Just see if they can process at a very basic coordination level, because the body is the brain is the body. Coordination. Flexibility. You want to go play tennis, you can't even twist for a backhand, you're going to tear your low back. You're stiff as a board, my friend. Let's do some stretching flexibility training here, so that when I do get you out there, that you can make a reach for that low ball. Because right now, you can't get there. You're not going to like tennis. Coordination, flexibility, endurance. 10 minutes of running around on the court and you want to vomit. I'm sorry, let's do some aerobic training. Let's work on your endurance, your vitality level here. Get this up. And lastly, strength. Your shoulder girdle is so weak right now that if you try to serve more than a few times, there's a good chance you're going to tear your rotator cuff, right? So you may not think this is tennis, but let's spend some time in the gym. Let's work on your coordination or flexibility, endurance or strength. Maybe not all of them. Maybe you're better at some than the other, but there are limitations. That's why the brain gym is there. Because when you go into the brain skills, I call them probability states. Like right now, if you're awake, you've had a reasonable breakfast, you had a good night's sleep, you're not having too much jet lag, there's a much higher probability that you're going to integrate this information. But if you get all those on the opposite side, you didn't sleep well, you didn't have breakfast, and you had too much coffee, it's burning your gut, you got a headache, the probability of integrating the information here is lower. So what you look at is probability. How can I increase the probability that when I do a brain skills composition, that the brain is going to learn this dance step? Because that's what the light and sound is doing. It's saying to the brain, hey, if you want to focus more, the dance goes like this. Can you follow me? Right? The light and sound signaling is like teaching the brain dance steps, function-specific dance steps. And maybe you can do the dance step slowly, but what happens if the tempo of the music increases? Can you still do the same dance a little faster? Now let's play it even faster than that. Can you still do it? That's foundation, intermediate, advanced. Olaf. Olaf has a question.
Is it so that you can see on an athlete or a dancer or a art skater that they actually have a better brain capacity?
I believe that the video picked it up. Can you see evidence in somebody like a dancer or an athlete of these kinds of progressive benefits? I can say in general terms, yes, because this is the truth of neuroplasticity. The Neurolite is based on complex adaptive systems in general as a theory, it's also based fundamentally in well-known neuroplastic methods. So yeah, people will improve, they'll get better. Okay, this is like freestyle Qigong, I have no idea where I'm going. Right? Okay, I don't know if this fits, but I'll make the point. Be careful to not overly idealize or romanticize the experience in the light and sound itself, the direct, immediate, subjective experience. It's complex, it's powerful, it's boring, it's amazing, it's sublime, it's weird. Almost any adjective is possible. This is the eating the meal thing, so I'm sort of trying to get to where you want to go. At any time, if you feel like you want to stand up, go to the back if sitting down is bothering you or you feel like you're zoning. I'm not offended. Take care of yourself. Just kind of, let's dance, okay? The experience itself, the analogy, again, I apologize. You've probably heard it. It's like eating a meal. When you eat a meal, you have all the experience, the tastes, the flavors. I don't eat chili, so I hope there's none in it. And crunchy, and that's not so good, but I can't wait for dessert because I like it. You have that experience. Now, other than oral entertainment, eating has a purpose. When you finish the meal is when digestion begins. So do your best to cooperate. Don't do something that's going to give you indigestion as soon as you finish the meal. After digestion comes assimilation, and then the final outcome is the utilization, theoretically, why you're eating in the first place. Neurolight sessions are like eating a meal. Enjoy it. Value it. If you're a chef or a cooking show host or something, you can rate it. But have you noticed that sometimes foods that aren't necessarily very entertaining can be very beneficial? And sometimes foods that are highly entertaining, you may have some regret. So be cautious that you don't idealize or romanticize, or you introduce it to the person and a minute later, so how was that? What? We all know that exercise is good for us by whatever definition of exercise. And it's odd that we don't do it much of the time, right? But sometimes exercise doesn't feel especially pleasant. I mean, that's my experience anyway. Right? So it's good if it's attractive. If you love going to yoga, that's a plus. Right? But other than the fact that you want a diversion, you want to get away from the kids, or you want to meet somebody cute, or whatever it is, why you're going to yoga class. But there is this dynamic which is the real mature benefit of yoga. The doing of it creates a process which creates a result. So this is also true with the Neurolight. Now I'm going to give you some insight of expectation. Okay? I like technical stuff. I do my best to stay away from it, making sure you get what you need today. Right? Interrupt me. I'm encouraging you. I won't tell you why, because there's a depth of neuroscience behind this. But the experience in and of itself of the light and sound is impactful. The only thing you have to do, a person has to do, is be attentive. That's the step one, the door that Chris opened this morning to get in here. That's the step one of neuroplastic change, is attention. What do pain and pleasure have in common?
Acknowledge your attention.
Yeah, right now, if your right knee had this sudden, some kind of like orgasmic pleasure occurring in your knee, or if Wendy sticks a nail file in your knee several times, creating pain, what do both of those things have in common? Your attention goes to your knee. people, you know, whether you do visualization techniques or Qigong techniques or whatever it is, you know, new biohacking, psychological, mental, attention. That's the only thing you have to give to get the result in a Neurolight session. No, you can add things to it if you want, but be careful you don't spice up the soup too much. You know, too many colors in the oil painting, it turns brown. So just be there. Be there. You don't have to have laser-like focus. It's like watching a movie. You know? It's just like watching a movie. You know? See it and listen to it, and you're going to get the movie. Now, there's a period of what's called hyperplasticity. Hyperplasticity, meaning really ready, willing, and able for change, for a period of about 1 to 2 hours after the Neurolight session. This is consistent throughout neuroplastic theory. It's not because of the Neurolight. You've got roughly 2 hours, I mean, something like that, depending on your energy levels. You know, if your energy levels are low, if, you know, you produce as much ATP as your body weight every day. And the only reason why you don't weigh twice as much at the end of the day in 24 hours is because it breaks down that fast. So the body has to produce ATP on an as-needed basis. Okay? So if you're at an adequate level, if your capacity is reasonable, you've got a period of 2 hours where change is really potentiated. It's called a hyperplastic state. Now, I don't know if it's coincidence. Chris, you know, at some point we'll talk about that, but from Oriental medical theory and the circadian clock, you know that the dominance shifts every 2 hours through the organ systems. So I suspect that this 2 hour period has some real physiological basis recognized in other systems before neuroplasticity. But this period of 2 hours, do good stuff during those 2 hours. It's like eating the meal, you know. Don't eat the meal and go for a 10-mile run. So you've got the period itself of the experience, the subjective experience. Just give it your attention. Then you've got a 2 hour period of hyperplasticity. This is where you can introduce reinforcements. Things that run parallel to the intention of the session. Then it's going to go into a decline. It's going to pop again in about 8 hours. In about 8 hours, it's going to pop again. Now, I don't know if you notice, you know, on the 24-hour cycle, what's the classic amount of sleep time that we need? Famously 8 hours, right? Give or take. Metabolisms differ. But it's going to pop again in 8 hours. This is a little bit of your question coming up here about evidence and how do we know it's working and how do I get benefit.
So what do you mean by pop again?
Meaning that you will have a heightened hyperplastic state by popping. Thank you. Then again in 24 hours, then again in 48 hours. That's the cycling, so that after the 48, you come back again. If you work within that 48-hour period, try to give the same messaging. Try to work towards the same goal, the same skill, or the same process, because the body is still, the brain is still incorporating, assimilating, advantaging that process. I wish I was smart enough to say that I was the guy that came up with this, but this is the evidence from all kinds of neuroplastic processes. There's a great deal of research being generated out there, but they happen to be in fields that aren't necessarily aligned into one message. So you've got to fish with a very broad net. But to me, I've just offered to you a tremendous insight. Not just with the Neurolight, but just with brain adaptive processing, learning, whether you use movement, whether you use mental, or whether you use sensory. Because even separating them into movement, mental, and sensory is abstract. You know, your body doesn't separate the movement from the mental, from the sensory. Hold on. That's a question or a comment.
If you use those windows, 8, 24, 48 hours,
Yes.
can you make it on turbo so you're back on the light 8 hours later, or 24 hours later, or 48 hours later? You put it in system, or after 8 hours, you have to preferably go out for a walk, and 24 hours you go to the gym.
Yeah, yes to all of that. You know, this is a creative potential that you have. This is how, the question was, how do I get the most out of the Neurolite? I'm paraphrasing somebody's, maybe it was Mark. How do you get the most out of it? Well, you get the most out of the Neurolite by working with the body and brain on the brain's terms. That shouldn't be a surprise. You know, it used to be thought in physical exercise, somatic exercise, that the more you did, the better it got. And we know for a fact now that you reach this. The only thing I learned in economics class when I was in university, you know, it was the late 60s, what can I say? There was the law of diminishing returns, where if you keep on putting more in, you're starting to get less out. And this is true of the body as a whole and the brain. That by doing more, you don't get more. You know, our Thailand here, the king recently passed, you know, the economy of sufficiency, enough is enough. You know, where do you hit, what you want to do with not only the Neurolite, but my recommendation with neuroplasticity in general, is you want to hit that trigger point. You want to hit the threshold where the brain takes over. You know, in learning, some of you must be educators, like working with kids or even adults. You know, you got to, once you plant the seed, stop messing with the seed. Back off. Back off. And with the Neurolite, what you want is you want to hit that triggering point, that threshold point, because you don't want to do it for the brain. It's like teaching them to dance. Well, for God's sakes, once they learn the step, back off. Let them dance. Let them dance. So the idea here is that there is a skillful way of communicating with the brain in terms of neuroplastic change. And this is being recognized in this periodicity, which is natural to the being. There's the experience itself, followed by a 2-hour window of hyperplasticity, followed by roughly an 8-hour return, by a 24-hour return and a 48-hour return.
And how do you relate it to using the light?
How is that related to using the light? Think in terms, you know, I sometimes begin public presentations, you try to catch attention, right? When you do it. And I say, you know, the Neurolite is not important. And they go, well, I spent 4 or 5 grand on this stupid thing, it's not important. I say, what is important is neuroplasticity. Once you begin to appreciate neuroplasticity, the Neurolite is going to be really important, maybe even precious to you as a tool, as an instrument, I would say. Right? So think in terms of the brain's nature, the nature of your being, and how you can relate to it most efficiently. Period. Then, once you have that appreciation, see how the Neurolite can let you take advantage of that. So, to idealize, I would say a person has a session. I won't say for what, because there are so many examples. Make up your own example. And that you know for the next 2 hours, it would be really good if they XYZ, if they did something. The simplest thing is just have them take a walk. A nice, free, arm-swinging walk. That's going to improve the effect. It's going to increase the probability of them integrating the session information. They'll have a better recall of the dance step. Right? So within 2 hours, do something beneficial instead of something that reduces the benefit. Whatever it is. You know, there's so much information that I've generated that's all yours for free. Look at the neuroplastic reinforcement. You know, they're mentioned in the Neurolite Practical Guide for Beginners, right? Even if you don't have the Neurolite, you can have that. Just, I gave you cards there. There's the neurolite@gmail.com. Just send me a message, say, hey, can I have the Practical Guide for Beginners? I'll say, yeah, hey, here it is. And you'll see in there an abbreviated section on the neuroplastic reinforcements. A few that work really, really well. Again, I wish I'd made them up, but they're not mine, but I borrowed them from the community as a whole. They work really well. So then 2 hours. Then let them appreciate, depending on when you hit them with it, 8 hours later, you have an opportunity. If nothing else, just reflect on your goal. If nothing else. Like one of the neuroplastic reinforcements that's crazy is when you reflect upon what it is that you have gratitude for. This is Rich's zone, gratitude, right? The fascinating thing, well validated, is that even if you can't think of anything to be grateful for, simply the cognitive process of reviewing what you could be grateful for is beneficial at a neuroplastic level. Then, come on, that's pretty simple. That's pretty simple. Simple things done well work well. I expect to be cremated, but if I had a tombstone, I think I'd have that put on it. Simple things done well work well. Usually people see complexity because they're not doing the simple things well. They think, I have to do something a lot more complicated here because I'm not getting the results. Let's start off with, are you doing simple things well? Because they work well. Then, this is the thing, for those of you that have had some degree of experience with the Neurolite, I don't know, I either expect or I hope or I'll point out the fact that in terms of evidence, in terms of something that you palpable, that you say, in most cases, other than, the dreamy afterglow of the session, which, whatever that is, the next day on a 24-hour, later the next day, and it may not be precisely at 24, but let's just say the next day. If you had it in the afternoon, the next day in the afternoon, you're going to feel something. And you probably don't associate it with the neuroplastic stimulation. You probably don't. But I encourage you to reflect upon the fact, just, It's like, I live up in the mountains here. And by the way, if anybody after this wants to come and visit, I've got a big fat house, lots of guest rooms. Jennifer knows what it's like. You've got the card, contact me. If you want to come up for, 2-3 days, a few of you, and we can do more of this, you're welcome. My point is that in the village, which you may experience, is I take a walk, 5-6 days of the week, if I'm there, from my house up to the temple and back. I don't like it when I'm walking up the hill, but I try to have a good attitude and, all the stuff you do, all right? And then I walk back down and say, this is much better because I'm going downhill, right? When I do that, I feel better the next day. I don't necessarily feel better when I get back to the house. It's like, hello, ooh, Okay, I do sleep better, I'll admit that. Maybe it's from the exercise. But I notice that when I do this at a reinforcing periodicity, some regularity, I feel better. And oftentimes, I feel better the day after. And if I'm smart, I'll do some more. But I think, I feel better, why should I take my walk today? Then the next day at 48 hours, it's like, yeah. Okay, so, it's 9:30. We've been pounding the nail for almost an hour now. I'm going to suggest, and some of you know that we're here at 8:30. In 5 minutes, I'm going to start again. Let's just take a mini break, get some fresh air, stretch your legs, get some questions. I want you to be satisfied when you leave today, Jesus, in an hour from now. Okay? Time flies. Thank you. You can hit the button.